Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. It's Football at 4.
Football at 4, powered as they do each and every day by the Inside the Birds podcast. Jeff Mosher joined us yesterday, and joining us today is Andrew DiCecco to talk more about Eagles training camp. The joint practices with the Patriots continue up there, as well as getting ready for Thursday's preseason game, which you can hear all the action right here on 97.3 ESPN. Coverage begins at 6:30 p.m. on Tuesday night. The Eagles are finally down to the 85. We'll talk all that with Andrew DiCecco now here on 97.3 ESPN. Andrew, how you doing today?
Hey, Josh, doing well. How about yourself?
Doing pretty good. And I think that, to some people, the cuts that just came down may not be very significant to them, but I think it's very telling because they waived Kerryon Johnson, which means that, to me, this running back situation is pretty much locked in stone. To me, it looks like it's going to be Sanders, Howard, Gainwell, and Boston Scott, because with Johnson being week to week, it looks like they said, hey, man, we gave it a shot, but we're moving on.
Yeah, and if you listen to Inside the Birds, Adam and Jeff have been all over this for quite some time now. Jeff and I actually did a sort of a debate, point-counterpoint preview before the season where we picked the winner of that battle, and I took Kerryon Johnson, and he took Jordan Howard, and he sent me a text a little bit ago saying, looks like I won that one. It's one of those things where you have to see the writing on the wall. Kerryon Johnson's only played in 34 games across 3 seasons. You like what it was a low-cost, potentially high reward bringing him in. He had another knee injury, but you liked his skill set, right? He was a good complement to Miles Sanders. He has the burst, the breakaway speed, the pass protection prowess, good receiver out of the backfield. But unfortunately, he just wasn't able to put it all together. Once again, you have to wonder what lies ahead for him, given, he is just 24 years old, but I mean, there's the history there, and he wasn't able to make it happen here in Philadelphia with a good opportunity in front of him.
When you look at the running backs as well, I think that it should not be overstated enough. I mean, I don't think we can overstate it enough, I should say, that this is an offense because of who Steichen is and who Sirianni is. They like to use running backs for a multitude of different things. So, to me, this is also a point to the fact that they're not going to just have Miles Sanders out there all the time. They're going to use all of these running backs week in and week out.
Yeah, and again, this is something that I've outlined in my writing and they've discussed on their podcast, and that is been the recipe that Nick Sirianni and the Colts adopted last season, and when they had the Jonathan Taylors and they had the Jordan Wilkins and the Nyheim Hines. The Eagles have Miles Sanders, who's going to be their prominent 3-down runner. You have Jordan Howard, who's by all intents and purposes going to settle in as that between the tackles bruiser. Then you also have Boston Scott and Kenneth Gainwell, who are change-up runners who can add another dimension as weapons out of the backfield. And then you also have potentially a Jason Huntley who can contribute in the third phase as a kick returner and also has a little bit of springiness and burst to his game. So I could very easily see them keeping 5, but they're all going to sort of slot into these different roles, and that's really what you saw last season with the Colts. So I sort of see him bringing that over here in Philadelphia.
Let's look at the other 2 guys that they moved on from. Obviously, over the weekend, they cut Caleb Wilson. They cut Adrian Killians. But today it was Kerryon Johnson. But they cut 2 offensive linemen. I don't think people are going to be too surprised about Casey Tucker. But I got to admit, Andrew, I was a little surprised about Luke Juriga because last year he was in many ways your backup center, and it seems like the team has decided they're going to go elsewhere with the backup center situation.
Yeah, it's one of those things where Casey Tucker, he keeps coming back to the Eagles, and he's always one of the first guys cut. He flashes a little bit in the beginning, and then he just gets sort of buried on the depth chart, and he's not able to impress the coaching staff in his limited reps. But then when you look at someone like Luke Juriga, who I saw as a sleeper in the 2020 NFL draft, and he shined at the East-West Shrine Bowl, and he looked like a prospect that the Eagles were very intent on developing. However, when you have to cut down to 85 players and you're injured, how do you determine keeping that player around? I mean, if he's injured, he can also return to the Eagles in some capacity and develop there. I don't know that people are going to be vying for his services given his given the element that he's dealing with. But I mean, he does have some promise. But now you look at guys like Sua Opeta and some of the depth guys along those lines that now have a good opportunity, because I think Luke Doriga would have been a dark horse to make this roster had he remained healthy because of his versatility and his upside.
So what do they do now? Is it? Are we assuming it's Nate Herbig as the backup center? Could say Amalu maybe start getting some reps when he comes back from injury at center?
Oh, I think it's going to be Nate Herbig in that role.
So then looking overall at the offensive line, how does the offensive line in your mind start shaking up? Because I'm assuming that, again, this is a personal stuff. I'm not reporting anything, but I'm assuming the Eagles are going to trade Andre Dillard before the season. So my opinion is I think that you're going to have a team with what? It's going to be the 5 starters, and then it's going to be Herbig and who else on the team? Matt Pryor, I guess, and who else?
I mean, Matt Pryor is not a surefire lock to make this team either. You're going to have guys like Brett Toth and Sua Opeta, Coyote Awosika, the rookie free agent from Buffalo, who's a guard. He played left tackle and right tackle at Buffalo, but he's going to settle into a guard position, doesn't have the prototypical length to play tackle at this level. But he's another guy that's really emerged this summer and could make a case for a roster spot. So they have some guys there. I don't know that Matt Pryor has really ever put his stamp on any of those positions. He can play a lot of positions, but he can't do those relatively well. And just you can't keep someone on the roster just because of their versatility. They have to be a player that you feel confident plugging in the event of injuries.
Now, you mentioned Brett Toth. Were you impressed with him from that preseason game? Did he look serviceable to you? How do you feel about him? Because I know he's a guy that he's come and gone with the Eagles for the last couple of years.
Well, I was impressed with him. And Brett Toth, when he came into the NFL, he was a bit more of a project, but he sort of developed gradually over the years, over the past couple of seasons. And now I think that, is he a player that you want to plug in and feel confident in a game situation? Probably not. But I would feel more comfortable putting in Brett Toth than I would Matt Pryor if I'm the Eagles, because of his upside and what he's shown on the football field. He actually shows progression in his game, whereas Matt Pryor seems to really have remained stagnant. And it's all about upside when you're looking at those final offensive line spots.
Andrew DiCecco joining us here, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, at DiCecco NFL on Twitter. Give him a follow. Check out all of his work over at InsideTheBirds.com. Andrew, staying on the offense, I know that the whole internet is blown up with the highlights of Jalen Reagor's big one-handed catch at practice, but I keep having ringing in my head what Adam and Jeff have said on the podcast, which is Reagor shows flashes in practice, but can he take what he does in practice and become a more consistent player on game day? So what are your thoughts on Jalen Reagor at this point in time?
I think when you look at Jalen Reagor, it's all about confidence, right? I think last season you saw a player who clearly had the physical tools to play at this level, but he really struggled from a confidence perspective. You saw the social media, I think some of the buzz and the pressure that this city can sort of put on certain athletes if you don't get instantaneous production can sort of, it's either going to make or break some players. Some players rise to the occasion, and then some just sort of go into they sort of go into like a shell, and you don't really get to see what they're capable of. But I think now you're seeing Jalen Reagor be able to stack productive practices, translate what he's done in practice to, in this case, it'd be the New England Patriots. You saw a little bit of what he could do. He had a nice catch against the Steelers. Obviously had a drop there you need to clean up. But yeah, training camp is AAA and the regular season is the major leagues. So you really need to be able to translate that. And I would say the same thing for Quez Watkins. You want to see them perform on the practice field. That's all good and well, but you need to have that carry over onto the actual game action, because how many times have we seen players that are training camp standouts, the Nate Browns, the Hank Baskets, and we can go on and on, Carlton Agudosi from a couple of years ago, Afani Moma, but a lot of those, they become afterthoughts. And I'm not saying that's the case for Quez Watkins or certainly Jalen Reagor. I think that they're actually some of the few and far between players that are going to take their skills, and it's going to carry over because they have obvious physical tools. They're with a offensive coaching staff that are intent on developing young players. You're starting to see a lot of players really take that next step, turn the corner, and develop, far different from the coaching staff and the regime of old. And I think it's really encouraging when you're seeing some of these players really take that leap in their second seasons.
Andrew, head coach came out today, Nick Sirianni, said that DeVonta Smith was going to start working with team drills today. So obviously he's making progress. But he also made another statement. He said that he likes to see young players get work in the preseason because they think it benefits them more so than veterans. So does that lead you to think that maybe we could see DeVonta Smith in a preseason game before it's all said and done?
That would be something that I think it would certainly be beneficial, but I don't know if it would be the smart thing to do. I think that DeVonta Smith, especially when you're looking at the injury that he's sustained, I think you kind of just want to see him get these reps in practice. Don't put too much pressure on it. You know that I looked at DeVonta Smith as being the Eagles' most polished wide receiver going into training camp without even taking a snap, just based on his refined skill set and his ability to play all different positions and learn and be a quick learner and be very coachable. So I think that you know what you have in him. He's a sharp-minded football player, very high football IQ. You want to keep him healthy and just get to week one without having any setbacks. So I think in his case, it's a case-by-case basis, Josh, but I think in DeVonta's case, you just want to get him to week one healthy, so I don't see the need.
One of the things that I love about DeVonta Smith, I want to ask you about this as well, because you watch a lot of game tape, you watch a lot of the prospects that they come out of college football. You go back through his career, I don't think people realize that, yes, he won the Heisman Trophy last year, but you could argue that DeVonta Smith was the most consistent and productive Bama receiver over the last 3 years. He was still producing at a high level on a team with numerous guys who were drafted in the first round before he was ever drafted in the first round.
Yeah, and it's funny because I asked one of his former defensive backs when I saw him at the Shrine Bowl, I guess it was a couple of Januaries ago, I named Jerry Jeudy, I named all the receivers that they had there, and I said, of all those guys, who was the toughest cover? And he said DeVonta Smith. And that speaks volumes when you look at the deep receiving core, and they all have all these different traits. But DeVonta Smith sort of is the full package, and just a very proficient, detailed route runner, smart player, can win on all three levels. So when you're hearing that from guys that he was going up against in practice every day, that just speaks volumes about what he can bring to an NFL offense, to an offense in general, but in this case, an NFL offense.
Andrew, let's flip it over to the defense. I was listening to Jonathan Gannon talk yesterday, and he mentioned the fact that, his big thing he keeps telling the guys that he wants them to do is just, focus on what they can do and not worry about everything else. And it seems like that even though Gannon's defense has more complexities to it than Jim Schwartz's did, it seems like his message, he's trying to keep things simple for the guys at training camp. What are your thoughts on that?
At least in the preseason, yeah, I think you're going to see things start to get ramped up, a little bit more complexities and different looks, and pre and post snap once the season gets underway. Right now, yes, the message has been everyone focus on their assignments, and I think he sort of evaluates what each player can do and what area needs a little bit more coaching and things of that nature. Maybe some guys are out of position, but I think that you're simplifying things in the preseason, which is what we all expected, a very vanilla game plan. And then you're able to look at each of the three levels and figure out what you have, where they're going to slot, and what you need to work on each position group. And then I think from there, you start to add the different looks and the complexities and the different layers to the defense. So I'm not really surprised by that approach. I don't really think you're going to see much of anything on Thursday from the offense or the defense. I think that's going to be a continuing trend, and as it should be.
He was also very complimentary yesterday of Alex Singleton, a guy who missed a significant amount of time because he's on the COVID list. And he comes out there and he plays well on Thursday. And if you believe the words of Jonathan Gannon, defensive coordinator, he apparently thinks very highly of Alex Singleton. So what does that message say to you?
Yeah, I just can't envision a defense that doesn't include Alex Singleton playing opposite Eric Wilson. When you look at the time that he missed, he only had a couple of practices under his belt, Josh, before he took the field against the Steelers. Didn't look like he lost a step at all, really carried his momentum over from the previous season. He wasn't a flash in the pan, a very instinctive player, good awareness and anticipation, smart player, plays with tenacity, and he's all over the field, man. He had 7 tackles, and I believe it was on just under 20 snaps. So, I mean, he needs to be a starter. And I think he can really be the quarterback of that defense and get guys and become a leader and ascend in that role for Jonathan Gannon. I mean, it's just remarkable sort of that they uncovered this gem from the Canadian Football League. I mean, It's hard to believe that I believe he's 27 years old, but he hasn't played a ton of pro football. So I think he's sort of just scratching the surface of how good he can be.
When you look at the situation when it comes to the linebackers, do you think also Singleton's play will be elevated because of Gannon's scheme? Because we know in Minnesota and Indianapolis, the emphasis they place on the linebackers there.
Yeah, this whole coaching staff in general, to me, I envision them putting their players in the best position to be successful rather than sort of shoehorn them into their respective schemes and do what they want them to do, even though it might be outside of their skill set or things of that nature. I think that you're going to see a lot of players be schemed and coached to their strengths. And that includes a guy like T.J. Edwards, who, speaking of linebackers, he's someone that really looks to be in remarkable shape. Another one guy that flies all over the field. I think he's going to be in for an elevated role this season. Yes, he is a traditional two-down run defending linebacker, but I think he's shown remarkable made some strides in pass coverage, which has been what really held him out of being a more prominent role on defense. And I think he's another player that really took a next step. Sean Bradley, again, these are guys who I think they're going to have different packages and sort of scheme to their strengths. And I think you're going to see that throughout the entirety of the defense.
Also considering the defense, you mentioned some names there. What do you think Sean Bradley's role can be for this team? Because he had a nice game on Thursday night. There's a lot of reports coming out of camp that the Eagles coaches are happy with him. Obviously, apparently he put on some size and got stronger and faster this offseason. So what is your perspective on him?
You have to be careful about amplifying one preseason game at that, and sort of blowing it up to maybe think a player is going to carve out a significant role on defense. With Sean Bradley, there's a room for Sean Bradley on every roster across the National Football League. However, he's more of a fifth or sixth linebacker. He's limited athletically, but he's very smart, very tough, going to be a core special teamer, someone that you can plug in there, and if you need him to start for a couple of games, he can do so adequately, but he's not someone that you want out there for a consistent long stretch of games, because then sort of some of his deficiencies sort of surface. But, I mean, he could very easily latch on to the Eagles as a fifth or sixth linebacker. I could see a guy like him or an Elijah Riley or someone like that being a special teams captain. So, I mean, I really like the strides that he's made from year one to year two. He definitely got stronger, and I think his awareness and play strength has developed, and you have to like what you see there. I mean, they have a collection of linebackers who don't have necessarily high pedigrees, but they're all sort of falling into certain roles, and they're making good developments early in their careers.
He's Andrew DiCecco. Follow him on Twitter at @DiCecco NFL. Check out all of his work over at InsideTheBirds.com. And he joins us every Tuesday and Friday on the Sports Bash. I talk Eagles football all month long here on 97.3 ESPN. Andrew, next time we talk to you, we will have a second preseason game under our belts. So I'm looking forward to having that conversation with you on Friday's show.
Yeah, man. Look forward to it.